Okay, welcome to the Toronto Real Estate Podcast. As we hit the midway mark in 2024, we're taking a deep dive into the Toronto real estate market by tinkering underneath the hood to see what is actually going on. And then we're going to take a look at some of the key indicators to keep your eye on this summer, which may indicate which direction the market is going to be moving as we move into the fall and even beyond into 2025. My name is Ralph Fox, and I'm the co-founder and broker of record of Fox Marin. And today I am so privileged to have both Jerome Werniuk and Rueben Labovitz at Fox Marin joining us for this stimulating and highly interesting conversation. Gentlemen, good morning, and to whoever is watching, could be good afternoon or good evening. Great to have you guys here.
Thanks for having us. I hope people are watching us all hours.
All hours. Maybe somebody's watching at 4 a.m. And if you are, that would be amazing. Please comment in the link below and let us know that you're here. Okay, so let's get into it. Very interesting year in Toronto real estate. I think everybody pretty much in January has gotten it wrong. It's just all various degrees of wrong. But here we are. It's definitely interesting times. So the one thing I want to talk about first off is months of inventory. I have this interesting chart that we actually had up last week, and I'm going to put it up right now. Do one of you guys just want to explain what the concept is of months of inventory and why we look at it so much, and why, when we talk to our clients, why it's such a big indicator for us in understanding what's happening in the market? Any of you guys want to take that one on, just the description of it?
Ruben, you got it.
Sure. So months of inventory. Say we come to an end of the month, the last day of June, and we look at how many properties are on the market at that time. Months of inventory tells us if no other property comes on the market, how long will it take for the existing inventory to sell?
Exactly. Thank you for that. And so what we're doing right now is we're looking at a trend line, and we're looking at how the months of inventory has changed going back to 2019, which is right up here on this graph. And what's really the big story right now is we have a tremendous divide in the market in months of inventory between condos and low-rise homes. Jerome, can you talk a little bit about that? Maybe what you're seeing and what you're thinking and conversations you're having with clients, knowing that across the GTA, we're at 4.4 months of inventory. And in downtown Toronto, we're trending even into between 5 to 6 range. So a lot of inventory is sitting on condos. We have row houses at 2.5 months, detached at 2.3 months, semis at 1.6 months. So we're definitely seeing a juxtaposition between condos and low rise. And when you look at months of inventory, one of the key indicators is theoretically anything below 4 months, and we are in a seller's market. 4 to 6 months is considered a balanced market, and anything 6 months or above is considered to be a buyer's market. Jerome, what are you seeing in the market right now, knowing that we're starting to get into definitely buyer's market territory, especially in central and downtown Toronto, which is the area that we work, versus low rise, which is still very deeply entrenched in a seller's market?
Yeah, it breaks down quite simply. Is high rise or condo, we could call it, about 50%, some would estimate even 60% of these condo units are owned by investors. They are a lot more sensitive when it comes to interest rate hikes, and they trade primarily based off of the hope of future appreciation, or they have for the last 10 years. Now, low rise is primarily owned, we'll call it 95 to 98% by owner occupiers, people that are moving in, it's their primary residence. And whenever you have a downturn in the market, increased cost to borrow money, slowdown in the economy, what's going to get hit first are people that are speculating or investing in properties. So that's where the big divide has branched out here. And I think for condos now, we're in like absolute above record months of inventory at this point, meaning it is very, very slow to sell a condo right now relative to low rise.
Awesome. Anything you want to add to that, Ruben?
No, I would just say, I say no and then I start talking. I would just say that I agree completely with what Jerome said, in that the number of investors that would traditionally be looking to purchase a condo for investment purposes, the numbers just don't make sense for most of them unless they have really significant amounts of cash to put towards a down payment. It's something like 56% is what's required to kind of break even on a cash flow basis. And while nobody really invests in Toronto real estate for cash flow, if you're paying $1,500 a month to have a tenant live in your property, not a lot of people are able to float that right now.
Exactly. And you look at the risk reward, and just tucking away at 5% at a GIC starts to look a little bit more attractive in this environment, at least on the short term. But those who do have cash and can think long term, it's a bit of a different lens, but different really markets right now that we're seeing as the divergence of months of inventory is indicating. And if those trend lines continue, we would theoretically expect to see a softening of prices on the condo market versus low rise. So definitely a very interesting trend line that we've seen, and that gap seems to be widening right now. So it's something that's really going to play into the summer market, and it'll be interesting to see what factors may affect it as we move into the summer or into the fall and into 2025. Another thing I really wanted to talk about that we've seen right now is, let's talk about interest rates. And a lot of people in the spring and even at the beginning of the year were anticipating rates to come down. It appears that we are in that environment right now. And we had that first really well anticipated drop of 25 basis points in June. But what's really interesting is what was anticipated happening, at least the consensus, didn't actually happen, whereby we had a lot of people anticipating and agents and buyers and sellers anticipating that with that first signal of that rate cut, knowing that will be further decreases ahead, that we would see a lot of buyers starting to jump into the market. And really what we saw happen was the exact opposite, where we saw a lot of sellers who were waiting in anticipation of these buyers coming to the market jump in. So we saw a rush of inventory coming on the market, but the buyers just weren't there. So that's really interesting. And there was a report that was put out by Rueben Labovitz, and they did a survey. And what they found was 51%, and this was more at the beginning of the year, 51% of would-be home buyers said that they would resume their search if interest rates decreased, but only 10% said a 25 basis point cut would prompt them to jump back in the market. 18% said they were waiting for between 50 to 100 basis points, and 23% said that they need to see a drop of more than 100 basis points. So this survey turned out to be a really good predictor in that this first rate cut just simply wasn't enough from an affordability standpoint to get people to want to move forward. Jerome, can you tell me sort of what you were seeing with your conversations with buyers and sellers as we moved into the summer, May and June, and how all of this has sort of played out to get us to where we are at this point?
Yeah, I'll focus on first-time home buyers because I think they are one of the best indicators. They're net new buyers or owners of real estate in the industry. And the conversations with them is that, or have been that, we need to see a substantial rate cut for them to get really excited about jumping in and buying a home, or we need to see prices rapidly increase where it kind of sparks a FOMO mentality. And if you look at the numbers, prices today are only about 5% lower than peak prices. And if you think about like $1 million home, the monthly mortgage payment's still about 25% higher than it was before the rate hikes began. So if prices remain static and don't move too much up and down, I think we'll probably need to see another 75 or 100 basis point drop for these monthly payments to get back to pre-rate hike numbers. And I think that's when a lot of first-time home buyers can make sense of it, saying, okay, I'm basically back to where we started when I didn't buy a home 2.5 years ago. Now's the time to jump in.
Yes, and who knows where prices will be at that point in time. And so I think a lot of people were starting to anticipate that the signal of that first rate decrease would signal that we're at the end of the cycle. We're not even talking about a pause. Rates are going to start coming down, and that you could take a variable and take the ride down with rates. But clearly what the market has shown us, going back to your point, Jerome, is that a lot of buyers, first-time buyers, are sitting there saying, we get the signal, but we still can't make the affordability work based on what the monthly cost of payments are going to be. It just isn't making sense. And so I think it leans back into what that survey was saying. Ruben, anything you want to add to that?
I would just say anybody who's watched the podcast over the past however long we've been doing it has seen us made a lot of predictions. And I think it's really only because of the conversations with clients that we've had over the past however long since rates were maybe starting to hint that they might come down, where everybody was kind of right on the money, is that one cut was not going to do anything. We sat here, we had these conversations that because of what our clients were telling us, because of just what we were seeing in the market in general, that it was always going to take more than one. And I completely agree with what Jerome said. I think it's going to be another 75 basis points, maybe even more, before anybody gets really excited about it.
Interesting. Okay. And so that's a real interesting trend that we saw play out this summer and is still in process. At the time of filming of this, we are still waiting for the July 24th or 25th announcement from the Bank of Canada, which now looks like there could be a second decrease coming, which I think will definitely help things from affordability standpoint at the very least. Okay, so I have another question here there was an article in the Toronto Star about this, which I found really interesting. Toronto condo sales are tanking, right? But yet prices aren't budging. Why?
Yeah, honestly, I'm kind of perplexed by it as well. Like we're seeing rents go down 12% from the peak, and if we think about condo investors, as I said, they make up 50 to 60% of owners of condos. They should be the ones that are most impacted by that. They're the ones that are quite often negative cash flow by $1,000, $1,500 a month, and it's really surprising to me that a lot of these investors have been able to hang on and just ride out negative cash flow with the higher interest rates and not be forced to sell. And I've seen so many listings for condos that just make absolutely no sense relative to comparable sales. People overpricing, 10, 20% above market value, kind of hoping that they're going to get peak prices in an environment where we're just not even close to that, particularly with the absorption rate we're at, months of inventory we're at. So my guess is that there's a lot more people that have cut back on travel, secondary residences. They've moved from their Michelin star restaurants down to the Keg for dinner, and they're cutting those expenses before willing to take a loss on their condo investments. So who knows how deep that coffer is and how long a lot of these landlords, these investors can hang on. It's anybody's guess. But I've been surprised that there hasn't been more pain and downward pressure on prices.
Yeah, I think time will tell. When you look at months of inventory, that's a leading indicator of prices as opposed to a lagging indicator. So it definitely shows us where the pressure is building up in the market. And that could start to indicate that we could start to eventually see a softening in prices. But it's the one thing that, throughout all of this intense 2-year cycle that we've been in, that I have always maintained is that people will hang on to their Toronto real estate with their last dying breath. And so I think we're seeing that play out. And it's really interesting because from my lens and what I see across the market, we are having lots of conversations with our investor clients. We do have a lot of investor clients. And basically, no one is being forced to sell because of economic circumstances. Perhaps the stress test has played into this when people originally purchased their properties. But people are finding a way to continue to own their Toronto real estate. And we've been advising all of our clients, if they can do that, because it just doesn't make sense to sell at the bottom of the market. And as we know, if you have $1 million property and it shoots up next year by 10% or 15%, on paper anyways, those losses can be regained very, very quickly. And I think a lot of people are sort of thinking that way, knowing that rates are coming down now and we're starting to see the downward trend. And if it's another 6 months and it's $7,000 or $10,000 out of your pocket for a specific property, it's probably going to be worth that versus trying to sell with 8,000 condos on the market. It just doesn't make sense. If you're if you own a generic account condo right now, unless you have to sell to put it on the market. Ruben?
I'll add that the conversations that I'm having with a lot of listing agents who have these condos that are sitting at 10 or 20% above what the actual market value is, they're saying, well, hey, look, my clients have held on for this long. Why would they consider selling now at a 10 or 20% discount versus what they could have got at the peak of the market? They're listed. They would like to sell if they can get this number, but they're under no duress. They have no obligation to sell. And sometimes it works out. Sometimes you see a property that's listed 10 or 20% above market value and it's sitting on the market for 3, 4, 5 months. And eventually somebody gives in and gives them their number. But more often than not, you see those listings terminated, rented out again. And then who knows, in a year or two, they'll probably come back online.
And I think the other thing you have to understand is a lot of these investors have a significant amount of equity built up in their properties over the last 5, 6, 7 years. And so I think that adds into part of the story where they're like, we have the ability to sit, or we have the ability to wait this out. And a lot of the people that we're talking to, especially ones that are end users that live in their condo, we've had multiple conversations that are trying to figure out a way to move up, knowing that they may have to sell their condo for a little less, but they could probably buy maybe into the freehold first-time home buyers market and take a little bit of a bigger delta there. They're just unable to do that. And so they're being stuck in their homes because they'll have to sell for too great of a discount on their condo. And as we're talking about, it's going to be a really tough to move from a condo into a first-time entry-level house, because that's pretty structurally strong. That's probably the strongest part right now of the low-rise market versus the luxury market. So it's a lot of home buyers are stuck in their houses as well, who want to move up but just can't because of the current condo environment versus the low-rise environment. So when you have these investors just putting a property on the market, if it sells, great, and if it doesn't sell, that's okay. I think that's where we're seeing a lot of that stickiness. Another trend that I want to get into, and there was an article talking about this, it's that we have record levels of condos on the market, and yet families are struggling to buy homes. It's very interesting, and people are getting really upset about this as a construct, meaning we've got 8,000 condos on the market. Understood, people can't afford high-rise, but yet most of the homes that are on the market right now, a huge proportion of them are investor units. It's surging by over 50% in the last, I think, month or two, between 400 and 600 square feet. But those aren't suitables for families. Jerome, what are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, the pre-construction industry for, call it a decade, maybe 15 years, has been primarily driven by investors. And developers are going to build what sells, right? They pre-sell, what is it? They need to pre-sell 70% or 80% of the units in order to get construction financing. And the majority of people who have been buying up pre-construction have been investors. And what's most attractive to investors over the last 15 years has been studio and one-bed units. It's a lower price point than a two-bed. In terms of the rent you get and the issues you have with tenants. It's an easy way to get into investing in Toronto real estate. And so we've ended up with 70% of condo units either being studios, one beds, or 1+ dens, which is bananas. And if you look at the difference between a one bed and two bed, an average two bed rents and sells for about 42% more than the average one bedroom condo. I think that as the Toronto market matures and in general prices, both resale and rents go up, we're going to see the delta between a one and two bed get wider. So I'll give you a good example here. More expensive markets like Manhattan, probably being the best example here, where rents are usually about double what they are for one bed than they are in Toronto. You'll see two bed units sell for closer to 60% more than one bed units. So we've got 18% delta to make up because the rents are so much more expensive. More tenants want to move in with a roommate, split the cost. And so long term, I think we're going to see investors have more demand or appetite for 2-bedroom units. And I think we'll see after this reset of the pre-construction industry, I think we're going to see developers start to lean more favorably towards building more 2 or 3 bedroom units long term. And I also think we're probably going to see policy change around development, kind of forcing the percentage of 2-bed plus units increase for any developer that's building high rise. That's my prediction for this.
It already does exist. So right now it's 10% for 3 bedrooms. The problem is who is going to buy 1,000 square foot or 1,500 square foot 3-bedroom condo in Toronto for $1,700 a square foot? The numbers just don't make sense. And so in response to that, developers are like, okay, here's 700 square feet and we'll make that into 3 bedrooms. And the only people who are going to live in that are students or new immigrants coming to Canada. It's just not buildable. It's just not sustainable for families. And the part about the pre-construction, which you touched upon, which is totally right, is that anybody who's going to buy something 3, 4, 5, 6 years out, it's going to be an investor. An end user, their lives can be completely different 3, 4, 5 years. And we've seen it happen with homeowners who are looking to buy pre-construction. They'll buy a 1-bedroom because that's all they can afford. And now they're married and a kid 4 years down the road. And so from the pre-construction standpoint, it will always be driven by investors because of that time window. And it will be impossible from a condo perspective unless there is some serious change in the tax system and the fees that are driven on the condo market. 30% now go into taxes, which get passed on to a home buyer. Unless the government really gets serious about incentivizing fiscally this type of thing, I don't think we're going to see any change. It is so drastically needed.
I don't disagree with that. I will push back on the fact that, like, we've agreed low rise is still in high demand. Fast market, slow market, people still want to buy freehold. It's the easiest entry point to buy land, right? Once you get your average semi-detached up to, call it $1.7 million in Toronto proper, which is, in my opinion, not that far away.
We've touched it before. It's been there before.
Completely. And let's call it up to $2 million, right? Your average semi-detached home, east or west end of Toronto, is going to be about, call it 1,300 square feet, let's say. So you're at $1,500, $1,600 a foot for a semi-detached home. If we're just going to break it down on a price per square foot, once you get closer to $2 million, at that point, $1,600, $1,700 a foot for a 3-bedroom condo, exactly where you want to be, does kind of make sense. So I do think long term, like the demand.
I'm sorry, I just don't see that, because wouldn't you rather have at $1,300 a square foot a backyard for your family?
100%. I'm talking like
take the discount. It's just, and
I think there's a mentality thing that needs to happen where, especially people who grew up in the city, they grew up in a house. They are used to, their parents had a house, their grandparents had a house. From the larger condo units that we do have some investor clients who have larger condo units. Usually the people that rent those out are immigrants. They're not people who grew up in Toronto because they're used to living in smaller spaces. And I think that people who grew up in Canada or grew up in Toronto, they're going to really have to get used to that change, affordability aside. Because at a certain point, there just aren't going to be any more houses.
Yeah.
And
so true.
The last point I was going to make on this before we move on is that we've got this massive swath of baby boomers that have just absolutely rode the gravy train on real estate in Toronto since the 1980s, 1970s. And a lot of those people need to downsize like very soon. And a lot of those people are going to be looking for condos. And those people that are moving from a semi or detached home, they're not going to move into a 600 square foot 1-bedroom. I think we're going to see an increased demand for those larger condo unit sizes. What I'm most bullish on are these sort of mid-rise on Queen East, Queen West, and more residential neighborhoods, Leslieville, Bellwoods, where they're going to build and be able to sell, 1,200, 1,500 square foot units to people that are downsizing from the detached homes. And that's kind of the sneaky demand that's going to loop back around in this whole real estate ladder that I think is actually going to push up those larger units long term.
Problem is if you're 80 years old and you have a house in Rosedale, are you going to buy a floor plan on spec? You're just not. So there needs to be a way to have these built and available, and who's going to fund that? That's the key.
That's a fair point.
That's the problem.
Fair point.
And I think, and I've talked about this with a developer, and I'm like, you're not going to have somebody in their 70s or 80s buy something on spec that hasn't been built 4 or 5 years from now. Now, if somebody can build them and have them ready for somebody to move in, but the typical pre-construction model for that type of property isn't going to work.
Yeah.
But I think the demand is going to be there for sure. For sure. As the baby boomers continue to age and aren't able to walk upstairs, like somebody needs to build this. It's just the current model right now just doesn't work.
Yeah. But you could also see, I mean, baby boomers buying up multiple one bedrooms, converting. You can see conversions in buildings too, which might be the sort of hack to all this. But I don't know. We'll see. Well,
it's interesting though, because in Manhattan, they will often build pre-construction buildings and then go to sale once they're built. So maybe that type of building for mid-rise in the missing middle in really gentrified neighborhoods, maybe that might be a shift, because you're totally right. The demand will be there. It's just the way we do it isn't going to work.
All right, we're starting a fund. Click on the link below to get in on it.
That's it. Okay, one other thing I want to talk about in terms of what we're seeing, Bank of Montreal put out a report talking about young adults fleeing Toronto, and they also identified Vancouver. And they were talking about, as a result of that, markets like Calgary are absolutely flying right now, the best market right now, followed by like places like Edmonton, Regina, and Winnipeg. And we do have a lot of conversations with people, not necessarily moving outside the city, but definitely talking about it and talking about problems with congestion and crime and affordability in a way that at least wasn't conversational 5-10 years ago. Now, that just might be the fact of what it is to live in a big city like a New York or a Paris or a London or a Rome. We're not there yet, but we're transitioning in that direction. And so I thought it was a really interesting report where BMO is identifying this as a trend. We're definitely having these type of conversations, but we've also had conversations on the flip side whereby people like, let's say with COVID, who moved out to Hamilton, are trying to get back in the city because they realized Hamilton wasn't as great as they were hoping it would be. And now they're having trouble coming back into the city. Once you leave Toronto, it's very difficult to come back. So what are you guys seeing? What type of conversations are you guys having? And are you seeing this as a continued trend that's going to play out over the next few years? Or is this something that's just the summer of 2024?
I think
it's short term.
Yeah. Agreed.
And I was going to say what you just said, Ralph. We saw a lot of people move out of the city in 2020. And a year and a half later, they tried to come back and they were shocked as to what they could afford. And so I think anybody who is looking to make that move out, they need to be really serious about it. And the reality is that if you're gone, you're probably not coming back.
If you're young, if you're in your 20s and you're trying to figure out what to do with your life, and say you live in a small town, Northern Ontario, Thunder Bay, let's call it, I don't know, classify it as a small town. And you say, okay, I want to grow my career. I want to meet a spouse. I want to have a great lifestyle. And you look at the options available to you in Canada. You look at Toronto as one option, and we'll say Calgary is another option. Calgary has lots going on. It doesn't have as much crime. Weather's a little colder in the wintertime, but they got a lot of sun. There's a young population that's starting to grow. But then you compare that to Toronto, and you come to Toronto, sure, it's going to be way more expensive, and it's going to be a grind. You might need an extra job, but you can walk out of your condo downtown, go to a Jays game, go eat at a really nice restaurant, go to a club the next day, and then do that all over again, except the next day it's a concert, it's a different restaurant, it's a different bar, and you can keep doing that for a year without doing the same thing over. And that's where you will meet potential partners. That's where you'll meet people that are going to help build your professional network. At the end of the day, there's a momentum that a city the scale of Toronto has that just long-term cannot be stopped. And sure, having lived in New York City and San Francisco, those cities have problems that a lot of people complain about, but there's something so attractive about those cities because of the size and the history and everything and all the amenities they offer that no matter what, those cities are never going to be empty. They're just going to continue to grow, and there's going to be ups and downs on the chart. But Toronto's at that point. This is a short-term thing. On to the next.
Awesome. Well said. So those are a lot of the key factors that we're seeing play out this summer, and definitely what's top of conversation. But as we look into the fall and beyond, what's in store for the market? I think really the first place to start, and I'm completely sick of talking about it, but interest rates. As we talked about it earlier at the top of this conversation, we need to see a significant drop in interest rates to really see the movement, especially in the condo market. But as we all know, rates are coming down. There's probably another cut in the pipeline for end of July. That'll put us 50 basis points lower than we were at the start of June. And there probably is more to come. And it looks like there probably is going to be one in the US in September. At least that's what the market is betting. So we're definitely starting to move down. But what do you guys see regarding interest rates and how that's going to affect things, let's say from the fall to spring of 2025? What are you guys seeing? What kinds of conversations are you having with buyers? Because the sellers are there. Where are the buyers and when are they going to come forward?
I'll go first, I guess. I think and as I always say, I think you really have to separate it into condos and freeholds. Sure, rates are going to be the same regardless of the type of property that you're purchasing, but they are two different types of buyers, or two, like as we've discussed, way more inventory in the condo market. I'm going to go ahead and let's say we have two more rate decreases from the fall of 2020 of this year, 2024, to the spring of 2025. I could really just see the freehold market ticking along. Are we going to see huge increases? Probably not, but I don't know, maybe 4 or 5% increase in market over that time. I think that could definitely happen. And I think that people will be motivated at that point. I think people will start to see prices going up, start to see interest rates coming down, and they'll say, "Oh shit, I gotta get in on this before it's too late." On the condo market, we've talked about this. There's a lot of inventory out there, and I think it's going to take more than that. And I think it's going to take a longer time for that to fully rebound and for people to want to and to be able to get back in.
Anything to add on that, Jerome?
Yeah, I mean, generally August is the slowest month in real estate. People go away, no transactions really happen. I think August come early. It's already very slow out there. Even July 24th, another 25 basis point cut. I don't think it really moves the needle. The best lead indicator we're going to get for early 2025 is how the fall market reacts. And I've got a whack of clients who are kind of paused their search, waiting until the end of the summer, going to be jumping in the fall, supposedly. We'll see. I think there's a lot of people that are taking the same approach as buyers. And if we see a 25 basis point cut here in July and nothing until the fall market, that'll be the real indicator of if the momentum has actually started to bring buyers back to the market. If it's quiet in the fall, I think it's going to be quiet until probably Q2 2025, unless we see another, call it 50 basis point drops, putting us 100 basis points lower than the peak here. So all eyes are already on the fall market, and everyone's kind of written off the rest of the summer here.
The one thing that I will say, looking forward to the fall and into 2025, is since COVID, there are so many forces that are playing on the market that are much bigger than the market. It has literally shifted on a dime. And I have witnessed people giving up the condo market for dead or the Toronto real estate market for dead. And literally the next day, it's shooting straight up in a way that just nobody ever could have predicted. And by the time it's doing that, it's very difficult if you're a buyer to react. And so I don't know when it's going to happen, and I don't know how far out, and I don't know what the sweet spot is going to be vis-a-vis interest rates and the economy and government policy and housing starts and everything else that you factor in. But there will be moments in the future where it's just going to shoot up. And if you haven't made your move prior to that, whenever that is, I do think as a buyer, you will regret that. And as we know with all markets, it is literally impossible to time the market. But as interest rates come down, and that's just basically a given fact that they're going to, at some point we're going to hit a sweet spot, or at some point the emotionality and the fear of missing out, which is a driver in residential real estate because it's so emotionally driven, will swing. And so when that happens, it's really impossible to predict, and it's impossible to predict how the rates are going to come down and on what timeline. I don't think anyone can do that. But my point here is that there will be a turning point when the market will shift back. And my prediction is when it shifts back, I think it will be violent. I think it will be just straight up. And all of a sudden, condos, 1-bedroom condos or 2-bedroom condos will be holding off on offers, and there'll be 15 offers, because I've seen it happen so quickly before when other external influences are dramatically impacting the market and that emotionality starts to kick in. Let's talk a little bit about population growth as another factor to keep our eye on. In 2024, we saw unprecedented growth in the housing, in pressure on the housing market because of our demographic and population growth. We added 400,000 people in the first 4 months of 2024 in working age population. That's just in working age population, which is a 47% increase off of July's 2023's record. So we've seen tremendous pressure continually being put on as a result of immigration. And it's definitely been a driver. Like when you take a country the size of Canada and over the last 3 years, you add 3 million people to our population, of course that's going to impact the Toronto market. So what I'm getting at here is continuing to look at our population growth as a factor moving forward. Do either you guys have any impact on that in terms of, let's say, clients that we've taken on who are foreign investors, or not foreign investors, but foreign buyers or new immigrants on the rental side? Like, what are you guys seeing in terms of how that's affected the market? And what are your feelings on what type of effect that could have on the market going forward?
Rueben and I mean, as we kind of launched our careers, we did a ton of leasing work, and a good chunk of people that came in and reached out to Fox Marin, whether they found us on Google or social media, or maybe even our lovely YouTube podcast here. A lot of those people were immigrants, moved here within the last year or two, or hadn't even moved yet. And we're doing showings for them virtually. So many of those people show up and are so excited to be here. They usually have a job lined up before they get here. And they are generally people that are taking the tech jobs. They're taking consulting jobs. They're very well educated. They show up with some money, and pretty much all of them have a plan and a goal of getting in and buying real estate at some point, whether that's in year 2, year 3, year 4 after they've been here. But the majority of the people that we've worked with have the mentality that the goal is to buy real estate. And I don't think that goal has shifted no matter what happens to the market. And so, we're talking about a tiny microcosm of the population growth in Canada that you alluded to. But I do think the mentality of a lot of immigrants moving here is to try and live the Canadian dream of owning Toronto real estate, or owning real estate in general long term. And whether it's not in the first year or second year, I think that pressure and just the population growth in general will eventually put so much pressure on resale prices.
Completely agree. I'm going to take it back a sec, because I think it's really interesting that you say there have been 400,000 immigrants and so far this year, or the first however many months of the year, we haven't really seen that reflective in either the rental market or the resale market yet. And so I agree. And look, people come in, there's a limited supply. It's kind of basic supply and demand. But it's just really interesting to see that, at least so far in 2024, that just hasn't been the case.
Yeah. Where is everybody living?
I think they're with their aunts and uncles in Scarborough or in Mississauga, and they're staying there for a year or two, I think, but while they get settled.
It's interesting because there was a quote by Matthew Arsenault, who's the Bank of Canada's deputy chief economist, and he was talking about the vacancy rate. And what he was pointing out was Toronto's population has increased from January to April. That increase was 67% higher than the increase from January to April in 2023, which is really interesting. I wasn't even familiar with that stat until I read it earlier this morning. And he goes on to say that these are massive, massive, massive increases. And he knows, his quote is that we know that these cities are the main entrance for immigration. So that explains why it's much higher in Toronto than the national average. But they're also projecting that this long-term or even midterm is going to put a huge pressure on the vacancy rate to end up even lower than 1%. So definitely could impact the rental market as these numbers continue to increase, which is just shocking. And that's one of the things that I've talked about on this channel a lot, is how, the Liberal government likes to point to GDP, which has been very anemic but slightly positive. But if you look at GDP per capita, we've been negative for, I think, going on 8 quarters now. And so we're almost trying to juice our economy by bringing in consumers and spenders and workers. But if we can't find them places to live, and we can't find them employment, and we can't ensure that there's enough infrastructure in place for everybody living here to handle all of this pressure, it's going to be a long-term problem. And I think we are going to need, as a country, to find policy and solution to this, because bringing in all of these people without a real plan is going to be a problem long-term. And it definitely is and will continue to be a factor in the housing market. Now, let's move on to housing starts. So Ontario has seen its slowest pace of starts going back to 2018. And the promise is promised to build 1.5 million houses over the next decade. We are falling dramatically behind. We are down 37% from this time last year. And last year was really, really, really bad. So we're falling behind in starts, and we're also falling behind in pre-construction sales. Over 16 new projects with 20,000 units in the GTA have just been flat out canceled, and sales are basically at their lowest level. So we're not seeing investors buying. The pipeline is definitely drying up. And we're also seeing housing starts really, really, really going to anemic levels as well. What do you guys think that means for the mid to long term?
It's bad. It's bad. Like, we're going to have this chasm of no houses or no units delivered for like a who knows how long this freeze in pre-construction sales happens. But if you think about condo, somebody buys a pre-construction, 3 to 4 years later, they get the keys for it. So if you push that out 3 to 4 years, starting from last year, we're just going to have no units delivered to the city. And I think that point, we're looking way down the road here, but that's going to put a ton of pressure on pre-construction prices as we continue to grow the population. So I'm most nervous for the lack of housing that's going to be delivered. And we're really not going to feel that pain for 2 and a half to 3.5 years. But when it happens, I think it's going to be very apparent. You're going to see a ton of headlines around it.
Yeah, I mean, it's not only going to put a lot of pressure on pre-construction prices, it's going to put a lot of pressure on resale as well. Yeah. If there's nothing new being built, people who actually want to go and stand in a property and not just buy off of a floor plan, they're going to be paying a premium for that.
It's interesting. We've had a couple pretty smart people on this podcast. One was economist and analyst Ben Myers, who talks and writes and thinks a lot about the Toronto housing market. And more recently, we had Harley Nikelski on here, and he is the president at Baker, which covers, I think, about 35 to 50% somewhere of the entire pre-construction market in the GTA. And I asked both of them point blank, by 2030, what do they think resale a one-bedroom condo would sell for? And they both projected $1 million, which in this environment is really hard to even think about. But then when you start to extrapolate population growth, housing starts, pre-construction sales, and cancellations, it really starts to paint a picture of what the long-term future of the market can look like. And then the last thing I just want to talk about is government and government policy. One thing I do think will have an impact on the market is the dumpster fire of the US elections. The last cycle, with Biden and Trump in 2020, we saw a tremendous slowdown in the market, which is something I wasn't really expecting. But I think not so much out of fear, but I think people were just distracted at just watching this play out and just thinking, I'll keep my money a little safe and a little close to me until we see how this sort of resolves itself. And I think we're going to enter even into a more extreme environment than back in 2020. So I think that could impact the way we see things play out in the fall. And then I'm also thinking a lot about government policy. We've had a lot of finger pointing towards foreign investors. We've had a lot of finger pointing towards investors. We've seen a lot of detrimental policy put towards curbing both. And now it seems like we're in the works of even trying to go after homeowners and their potential potential tax-free property gains on selling their properties seems to be next up, all in the name of fairness and redistribution of wealth. Is this a short-term trend? Could there be a change in government that would take a much different direction on investors and homeowners and real estate? But there's a lot of tectonic plates that are shifting both in the US and Canada. And there's a lot of momentum in all kinds of different directions, which I think could really affect how things play out over the next few years. Is this something you guys are thinking about, or are these the type of conversations that you're having with clients?
One of the best examples is Airbnb came on the scene, I'll call it 8 years ago, maybe. And people bought properties back then specifically with a business plan, underwrote or wrote a pro forma for renting them out on Airbnb. Policies changed so many times, not just government policies within condominium corporations. And all of a sudden, those investments are no longer viable. Similar shifts, I think, what I think about most is around the rental market and primarily around, we have a change in provincial government or new provincial parties leading the government in Ontario. I think we could very well see rent control come back in place. It's a whole argument around how that could be bad, could be good, depending on what side you're on. And so I'm thinking about this. I think anybody, whether you're an investor or a homeowner, should be thinking about these things. And also what we're just really comfortable with in Toronto is like real estate prices have just generally gone up for a long time in Toronto. And people are all of a sudden shocked when an investment doesn't just go up and to the right. And when you're buying real estate, no matter what markets it's in, and I think Toronto is one of the best places in the world to be buying real estate right now, things could go down. There's risks to that. That's the whole point of investing. And I think government policy is actually one of the biggest risks that you need to be thinking about when you are buying real estate, particularly as an investor. So I'm kind of trying to give ad hoc predictions around what's going to happen with elections and policy to clients. But at the baseline, I want to make sure all my clients are thinking about worst case scenario when making real estate decisions, and what policies could end up or put them in a position where it is worst case, and plan for that outcome and make sure they can manage that outcome. So I think about it a lot, and I talk about it a lot with clients.
I think the policy risk at the municipal, provincial, and federal level in this moment has never been higher since I've been involved in residential real estate, spanning over probably 20 years. But things can change really quickly as well. And attitudes can change really, really quickly as well. So it's definitely an interesting landscape. Ruben, do you see the US elections at all playing out or having any effect on the market?
I think if anything, it will be indirect. I think, like you said, it's probably more of a distraction, especially right around the election period and leading into the inauguration, which I think is basically what we saw last time. And then it was, okay, after Biden was sworn in, I guess, 2021, in 2021, everything kind of freed up a little bit. So will that happen this time around? I don't know, but it's definitely something that we've seen before.
Awesome. Well, this has been a great conversation. This time next year, this is going to be my question. So let's say it's 2025 in July. This is an impossible question to ask, but I'm going to ask it anyways. And I haven't even thought of my answer to this yet. Where do you guys think we will be in the market?
Ruben, do you want to go first?
No, go for it. I'll take inspiration from your answer.
And I'm going to take inspiration from both your answers. I don't even know where I'm going yet with this one either. So
let's call it overnight rate at 375. Average home price, we're going to be up 8 points So that puts us at like, call it just under 2 million for a detached home in Toronto proper. And Ruben's going to have twins.
Ooh, that's
Interesting.
I'm gonna once again separate freehold from condo. I'll say freehold up 9%. I'll say condos up 2%. And I guess Jerome will be working on an army.
Amazing. All right. So I'm going to go last. The first thing I'm going to say is the Leafs will not have gotten past the first round of the playoffs.
That's such a layup.
Will Mitch Marner still be on the team?
No, he'll be traded over the summer in 2025. They'll get rid of him right after. He'll be run out of town, and he'll have to waive his no trade clause. Brendan Shanahan will be gone as well. So that's my Leafs prediction. In terms of the market, the overnight rate I see coming down even faster. I'm going to say we're going to be at 3 a year from now. I'm going to say the rental market will be quite strong. We will see vacancy rate below 1%. Houses, low rise will continue to outperform condos, but the condo market will have rebounded to a certain degree. I think we'll be back on the condo market into a seller's market, but slightly, maybe in like 3 to 3.5 months of inventory. And I don't know if we'll see price increases, but I think we'll see tremendous price stability. And I think the good properties will actually start to be trending up. And I think houses will continue to do well. I think we'll see 10% on low rise, especially with the 3% overnight lending rate.
There you have it.
Nice.
Guys, thank you so much for joining us today on the Toronto Real Estate Podcast. Pleasure and honor to have you and have your thoughts here today. And if you're listening, thank you so much once again for tuning in. If you have any questions or comments, and they are constructive, they don't have to be positive, but constructive, we'd absolutely love to hear from you down below. And if you love this content, be sure to hit that like or subscribe button. And we really look forward to seeing you next week.